Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. For those of you who don't know me, and I see a few slow food people in the room, so nice to see you or see that you're there. I am Peter Ruddock. I was a longtime member of Slow Food and worked on the Arc of Taste. I'll tell you later when Sarah and I are chatting about a couple of products. We say we boarded them onto the Arc while I was with Slow Food California. Not the one Sarah is going to be talking about, but there are something like 6,000, slightly over 6,000 items that Slow Food is protecting, or at least describing so that they can be protected. Heirloom foods. And that has been one of the focus of my work as a sustainable food advocate. And it's certainly the focus of Sarah's book. Sarah reached out to me in 2018 and introduced herself and said, did I know how to connect her to date growers? And I didn't know any of them personally, but I knew how to connect her through One Hop. And so I got her some connections and we exchanged a couple emails and our paths crossed at a Slow Food event. And then of course, with the pandemic, things sort of went quiet. If you read the book, you see Sarah did some of the work during the pandemic, as well as obviously there was editing and printing. But we were out of touch for a while, and then all of a sudden there's the book. I'm excited and we have to read it. And I have a book group at the Gilroy Library and a group of us read it together. And we're absolutely thrilled by it. It's a really great book. Stories of heirloom foods. And oh, I'm sorry, I thought the recording stopped. Something just happened on the screen, excuse me. And we're gonna hear some stories from Sarah. So the way this is going to go is Sarah is going to tell us some stories. And then I have a few questions for her that are centered a bit around California. And after that, we'll have time to take your questions. And as I said before we started the recording, you know, if we can have a queue, if you want to type them in, we can call on you, we can read them for you, but we'll have time at the end to have a conversation. So without further ado, I will pass the floor, the screen, over to Sarah Lohman.
Yeah, I love how you said, and all of a sudden there was the book. Yeah, all of a sudden in plus 6 years, there was the book.
Well, for you.
Yes, I'm glad it seemed like it was such a short amount of time, because for me, like, I'm getting these emails like, where does the book? Then I'm like, they take time. We're so used to being able to do things instantly. Even myself, you know, you do a quick Instagram post, you do an article which takes 2 weeks, but books are truly multi-year processes. And I reached out initially. When you're writing a nonfiction book, you build a proposal. So unlike when you're writing fiction, you usually, especially if you're a first-time writer, you have to write the whole manuscript and then pitch it to publishers to sell it. As a nonfiction writer, I get to pitch an idea, and every book I write, that idea gets to be a little bit shorter and shorter, because you're continuing to give examples that you know what you're doing, you know how you write. So this was my second book proposal, and one of the important things that you're trying to show in a book proposal is that you have some sense of your roadmap of who you need to talk to, where you need to go to. So I was writing this proposal towards the end of 2018. I think the book was purchased in November of 2018. And so one of the things I was working on in October as I was putting this proposal together is just reaching out to that slow food community, like reaching out to Slow Food, who then connect me to like the regional managers like Peter. I know that's not your official title, Peter, but I'm going to call you the regional manager of California. Basically, they're like, who's connected in these different regions I'm working on that can help me like get further along that connection. And then I researched for my very first chapter the date industry in the Coachella Valley. And Peter introduced me to Sarah C. Cates, Dr. Sarah C. Cates, who I call, and I know this is true, the world's foremost expert on Coachella Valley dates, which I'm sure, Peter, you would agree with me is 100% accurate. She's an amazing scholar. She's a history professor at Delta San Joaquin College, which is about an hour north of Sacramento. And my first book, when I was reaching out to interview people, it was often sort of a struggle to even get a response. I was a nobody. Nobody knew my name. Sarah was the first scholar that I reached out to kind of say, hey, I'm thinking of this book proposal. Could we talk at some point? And the email she wrote back to me was almost immediate. And she said, oh my God, I just listened to the audiobook of your first book, driving to and from work. I can't believe you're talking to me. I feel like we're already friends. And I was like, oh, well, this is going to be a very different experience than the first one. Now, to be fair, most of my interactions weren't like that. And especially working with Indigenous communities, I had a learning curve on the best way to connect with people, to talk with them, to build trust. And, you know, you're trying to gain access to a slice of someone's lives, which is a very generous thing to do for someone. And I have learned so much in this book, but that was a brilliant way to start. So that was definitely Peter's connection. So before, I'm going to open up a slideshow, and a lot of what I'm going to do today is show you some images behind the scenes of my travels for this book. So whether you've read it or not, you'll get to have these in your head. But just out of curiosity, could you use the raise hand function if you have read or are reading my book, Endangered Eating? Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, librarian Megan. Okay. All right. So the rest of you are newbies. That's fine. It's just helping me to understand how much backstory I'm going to give you. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview what the whole book is about, but I'm going to focus more on behind the scenes stuff. And like I said, we're going to look at images today as well. Okay. So as Peter mentioned, and I know some of you are associated with Slow Food, but for those of you who are not, Slow Food is an international organization. It's founded in the late 1980s in Italy in reaction to a McDonald's opening up near a famous Roman landmark. So it really was this direct reaction to fast food, is slow food, the local, the handcrafted. And the arc of taste is one of the main tenets of its work. As Peter mentioned, it's internationally over 6,000 items now. Here in America, it is now topped 500, I believe. And these are delicious and distinctive, often hyper local or rare or on the edge of extinction foods that one step is just sort of creating awareness of their existence. And Slow Food does other advocacy, like working with chefs and other things to make sure that these foods are preserved. But I think that its beauty is its rabbit hole-ness, that you can go onto the Arc Taste. It's online, it is free. There's an American version as well as the international version. And you can just start clicking through on these images and learning about these different foods. And you can look it up by regions. You can look up the West Coast, California. You can search by the name of your community. You can search Bay Area. You can enter all these search terms to see what pops up. So you can get, I don't know, it's just sort of changed the way I see the world now, both the interconnectedness of these rare foods, but also there's a little bit of excitement. It's imbued my travel with a deeper level when I can go somewhere and explore a food that is both hyper local and deeply cultural important to a local population. So my book is largely a travel book that on one hand, you can just be an armchair explorer. And I think that's great. And you can order a lot of the foods I write about online as well. But also it's sort of encouraging you, you know, if you're going to the Coachella Valley or if you're going to Hawaii, here is this local culture, this local food item that you can easily engage with that's going to give a little bit of a deeper level to your travels too. So I just love to continually explore. When you click on each of these, there's a little essay about the history. And when I was planning my book, I was looking at the country by region, and I just sort of initially went through and began pulling items that had some sort of hook, some sort of deeper cultural story here. I'll actually open up some of my behind the scenes planning docs here. So I was actually kind of surprised when I looked at this document at what items, like I actually didn't put too many extra items in here in terms of what ultimately ended up in the book. Some things got moved around. Sometimes I sort of hit a dead end in my research. But you know, for the most part, the stories that I was originally drawn to, like Hawaii heirloom sugar cane, are the ones that ended up in the book too. But mostly I just sort of began arranging things by region, just cutting and pasting links to stories that they thought were so interesting. So this was like step one as I was building my book here. And as Peter was going to mention too, but I kind of like, I didn't end up getting to talk about Shrub and Switchel in New England, which are two colonial era sort of refreshing, revitalizing drinks that are now seeing a revival. But after my book came out, actually a little before the book came out, Gastro Obscura reached out to me. They're an amazing travel website, the sort of food arm of Atlas Obscura. And they asked if I would start writing a column about rare and endangered foods. So I've got two articles out already. And I've got two more sort of in process. But basically, I've been able to take some of these stories that for the most part, just didn't have quite enough story to fill out a whole chapter and write them for an article. And some things I had to edit because I was too ambitious and I ran out of money and time and energy. And then there was a pandemic. So by the end of 2019, what was done was done. Now, lucky for me, I did most of this travel in 2019. I mentioned I sold the book in November 2018. My first trip was to the Coachella Valley in February of 2019. And that was for the Riverside International Date Festival and County Fair. I think I've probably, those words actually go in a different order, but it's the annual sort of date and county fair festival that is in Indio. Still happens every single year and was founded really back in like the 1940s to celebrate the local date industry. When I was still putting this proposal together, I still had to kind of make a travel plan. So when I reached out to someone like Dr. C. Cates, who Peter connected me to, I was sort of asked, like, if I wanted to understand this industry in all its glory, like, what time of year do I need to be there? What is happening? And, she'll say, well, you have to come for the Riverside Date Festival, and then you can go see these growers. So I had to create a basic travel agenda. This was an extremely travel heavy book. In 2019, I was on the road more than half the month because I was also traveling extensively to do talks and things like that. I mentioned this is where Peter and I met each other in person too, here at Slow Food Nations. So I had to, create this list of what I was writing about, where I was going, and then also more than half of the foods that I talked about were of indigenous nations too. So I also made a note of the indigenous nation, the state, and when I would have to go to, so that I at least sort of vaguely understood when I'd have to book these trips and leave room in my calendar, and then could narrow it down the closer that I got. If there was some sort of festival that I could, like hook my journey to, that always helped quite a bit as well. So it was a huge, I do love travel planning, so I didn't really mind it in a way. And then I had a whole system of like, okay, it's the chapter's been fully researched, the chapter's in process, I still have to do these, like I had to change colors, and it was a massive undertaking in terms of the organization. And the most of the writing I didn't end up even starting until 2020. I basically did all of the in-person research and interviews and photographs and travel in 2019. And 2020 is when I started reading a lot and then actually putting these things down on paper or digital paper, I suppose. This is just what a typical sort of organizational folder looks like to me. If I found links or articles or books that were relevant, I dump them into a folder called research. When I was getting on a plane to go to a destination to do research, I would I'd pay the $50 for the internet and then read through all of the articles out there on my way to my research destination. So it was fresh in my mind. And so I already knew what there was to know. And what was left was only the things that I needed to know that nobody had written about yet, the things I had to ask in person to an expert. So I didn't want to waste anybody's time, because when you show up for an interview already having knowledge and enthusiasm, that makes your interview subject really enthusiastic, that someone is asking them about this thing that they totally nerd out on and are asking really good questions. And that's what you want. And also my time was often very limited. I did not have an unlimited budget to do this. So I might only have 2 days in upper Minnesota to witness the wild rice harvest and talk to who I need to talk to. So I better be prepared. Sometimes I'd write down some questions that I needed to ask that I was curious about. I also pulled things from the books that I read and then eventually sort of piece that all together into a chapter. When I'm writing books, it feels like it will never be done. I don't know how I did this. So The book basically talks about 8 different items in 8 different regions, although I do talk about some things about the intro and the conclusion. And I feel like every chapter I researched, there were like 3 other Arc of Taste foods I came across. And I just love the interweaving of all those stories. So the first chapter is Coachella Valley dates, which the industry was started there in the 19 teens. The next one is Hawaiian heirloom sugar cane. This is basically a native plant. Hawaii was settled by Polynesian wayfinders about 1,000 years ago, and this is known as a kopuna crop or an elder crop, one of the original crops that Polynesians would carry in their canoes when they were going to settle a new set of islands. Navajo True sheep. The Navajo or Diné people in the Four Corners have been husbanding these sheep for about 400 years. The sheep are polysyrate, which means they have 4 horns, which is really unusual. They're uniquely suited to the Southwest, and the famous Navajo weavings, those weavings are made from the wool of this sheep. It's so much tied to Navajo culture that even in the METS, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Indigenous Art Gallery, there are 2 Navajo weavings there that are labeled Navajo Churro wool. That is how important this wool is. Salish reef net fishing. This is from the Pacific Northwest. This is an indigenous fishing method that both needs to be saved because it's incredibly sustainable, but also the work is on returning this fishing method into the communities that invented it 1 to 10,000 years ago. We're not super sure. Anishinaabe wild rice, upper Minnesota, but also the entire Great Lakes region. What was amazing to me about this is that it's native to my home state of Ohio, but I had no idea. I didn't even know that this wasn't like rice. They're totally different things. Asiatic rice is not closely related to wild rice, which is an American crop, and its closest relative is corn. It's a native grain to the Americas. Heirloom cider apples. Apples in most forms are not native, at least domestic apples are not native. But also, we used to have about 16,000 different apple varieties unique to America. And today we have in the neighborhood of 400. A lot of those were lost because Americans stopped drinking hard cider. But now there's a revival of people literally stalking the woods and old orchards, trying to find long lost apples from a century ago. And I got to see one of those stories play out in real time. Choctaw filet powder. This is an ingredient made from ground sassafras leaves, and sassafras trees are doing fine. Anywhere east of the Mississippi, you'll find plenty of them. But it's more about the loss of a traditional ingredient made in a traditional way, and that if we don't sort of pick up the teachings of our elders, then they also die with our elders too. And the Carolina African runner peanut. This is North America's first peanut. Even though peanuts are from South America and made it as far north as the Caribbean, there's no evidence that they were in North America before the slave trade. They came on ships with the enslaved because they were a familiar West African product. They stored a long time. They were very nutritious. And for a long time, were grown only in the gardens of the enslaved. There were women on the streets of Charleston known as groundnut cake vendors that would make a particular candy out of these really flavorful, oily peanuts. And although the groundnut cakes are also an Arc of Taste item, they have already been lost. There's no one making them, and no one is quite sure how they were made either. So it's more of a hopeful entry that someday people will rediscover them. So just a little bit of behind the scene. I just to share this archival trip I made to the Fairchild Tropical Botanical Gardens. Now, David Fairchild was a self-declared food explorer, and he and a team of botanists traveled the world finding better examples, like better producing versions of crops already grown in the United States, or like in the case of date palms, finding crops to introduce to the United States that they found did well there. Now, there's a lot there about colonialism and appropriation and introducing plants into our biome. It's dense with history. But he retired to a home and a garden just outside of Miami because he was very much interested in tropical botany. The botanical garden there bears his name, and many of the plants in it are ones that he planted himself, and his home site is also there as well, and his archive is attached to his botanical gardens. Now, I mention this because I'm often asked both by my editors, my students, people in my classes like this one, what is the archival research like? What is it like to get into those archives? And the answer is, one of the beautiful things about the internet, other than the fact that we get to connect over long distances, is that there is an incredible amount of primary source material online. Library Megan and Librarian Jenna, I'm sure, know all of this too from their librarian degrees. But like so many different archives and books are online now that it's actually pretty rare. You have to, in this case, fly to Miami from Ohio and go to an archive. So I took photos of it because it's rare. I have to do this nowadays. And this was a very like archivey archive too. Like it was kind of crowded and dusty and fun and full of secrets. And you don't want to go into these places without a plan. You'll get totally overwhelmed. And what I was there to see was specifically an unpublished manuscript about dates. It wasn't scanned online. They couldn't make a scan for me. So this is exactly what I had to show up in person. But what I didn't know would be in there is also some of the David Fairchild's original photographs. He was an extremely prolific storyteller as well as a prolific photographer. So there are images that this field of date palms down here, that is probably from Indio or Thermal, somewhere in the sort of southeastern part of the Coachella Valley, very early on in the 19 teens. That actually might even be where the Salton Sea is today, because they started planting dates before the Colorado dams burst and filled that area up with water. And then they had to move their date research station north to Mecca. But also there are images too, like from the places they connected dates, like North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. There are handwritten notes in here, as well as typed and corrected notes. Some parts of this would later become pieces of his autobiography, but this itself was never published. So it was incredibly helpful to me as I was telling their story and the story of the dates that they brought into Coachella. Here is an image from, I believe, North Africa. I think this is from Morocco, where they went in, like 1911. They were very early world travelers in America. And this is like before antibiotics. So like most people didn't survive world travel at this point. And here's another image of the date station at Mecca or Indio while the industry was getting started. But while you're sitting in there, part of the beauty of being archives is you discover things you didn't know you were looking for. And I had read in Fairchild's autobiographies that he and his botanist partners would have these little field books that they would take into museum collections or libraries or on the roads, and they would make all the little notes in there. And right there in a door next to me were all of the little field books that I'd only heard described before, and all of their teensy teensy notes about all the plants they introduced, from dates to mangoes to several types of olives to the Meyer lemon. Mr. Meyer was another one of these food explorer botanists. And there are crocodiles in America, I learned on this trip. This is what the botanical garden looks like on the outside. Of course, I had to go around and see what Fairchild had created. And I really thought the whole alligator versus crocodile mouth thing didn't make any sense, because I thought crocodiles were just in Africa. No, there are American crocodiles too. They are very rare and endangered, but and I didn't see her this day, and I am fine with that. And there were people having a picnic like 6 feet from this sign. Florida, man. Woof. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about Hawaiian sugarcane, but mostly because we think about sugarcane as a thing that makes sugar. And that is, that sugarcane began in Papua New Guinea. That's where it was first what am I trying to say? People intercepted and began knowledgeably breeding sugarcane. And then the refining process began in India. It kind of moves from Papua New Guinea to the west. And then in Persia is where it was fully refined. And then it moved into Europe from there, and from Europe to the Caribbean. So it's actually from the Polynesian Triangle. And as I mentioned, it was one of these crops that would go with Polynesian people while they were going to populate a new island chain. And especially in Hawaii, because there are so many microclimates there, sugarcane became very adapted to these very small areas. And it exhibits itself in these incredible colors, both inside and out, and a huge diversity in flavors. So on the left, we have papa'a, and it's like this dark maroon cane here too. And I can't tell which these are. I think this one is ha'ali'i, but you can see that this one is sort of like a golden sunset, where this one is more green and yellow. There are now educational gardens to just show people the beauty of the different canes. Yeah, there's halali'i, which is a pink and green striped cane. Kea, which is yellow with red, Makeko, which is another sort of dark purple cane, Laukona, yellow and green, Mahiaula, which is named after a red fish and is red itself. And then one of my favorite, Wahea Pele, which is named in honor of the volcano goddess and is also used in ceremonies for her. And it's a black and smoky gray striped cane. So they're so beautiful and also so important to Hawaiian culture as well. Basically, they were bred for monocropping, but now there's no more sugar refining in Hawaii. And the largest producers of traditional sugarcane are a couple distilleries too. This is what Maui looked like when I was there in 2019. It was the site of the last sugar refinery. I think it's Alexander Baldwin, HCNS is what it was called finally. And that closed down in December of 2016. So it was still standing when I was there in 2019. And what you're looking at is 400 square acres of feral sugarcane. Because although in the industry, sugarcane is replanted every year, it can still grow up from its roots. It's, you know, a natural grass. So it was just all of this land sort of waiting for what's coming next. And there's a lot of debate around that between high-end housing, resorts, military uses, and actually giving this land and its water rights back to the Hawaiian people. Another great West Coast one, as I mentioned, is the Salish reef net fishing. This is one I really think benefits from showing a little photo and video. And then I'm thinking, Peter, I'll talk about this one as our last West Coastie, and then we'll take some questions. So if you've got some, you know, you can start brewing. So I went to Lummi Island, which is where this red arrow is. The Salish Sea is the northernmost part of the Puget Sound, and this traditional fishing practice was practiced all around the Sound here, around the San Juan Islands, along the areas we know as like Bellingham, and also on Vancouver Island as well. The traditional peoples of this area are collectively called the Salish, but there are, I think, 7 different tribal nations that make up the total Salish people. The Lummi are one of the few who still practice reef net fishing commercially. However, through about a century of legislation, this very productive fishing technique was stolen from the Lummi people, and only just now it's being returned because a lot of it is you need resources to be able to build a fishing gear. Here's a close-up of where I was and where reef net fishing is still commercially practiced. Okay, what the heck is it? Here's what it looks like traditionally. 2 stationary canoes, okay? There is, wait, I want to get my laser pointer out, which I do think is helpful. Okay, laser pointer, 2 stationary canoes. A net is strung between the 2 canoes. This is parked in a current, so the net's going to billow out. And this is done during salmon schooling season. And you put your canoes in front of a place where salmon are running. So during season, they're going from saltwater to freshwater to breed. So a space between 2 islands, an estuary, the mouth of a river, you know, where are these groups of salmon, these schools of salmon moving? This thing out front is what is the reef. It is anchored to the bottom of the sound floor on one end and tied to the top of the net on the other end. And these are sort of ropes in between. They were originally made with cedar and now they're made with nylon, and they would be tied with grasses. So it to this fast moving salmon who's traveling along with the current, it creates the impression that they're still traveling along the sound floor until they're in the net. And then at the front, you've got 2 people called spotters, and the spotters are literally looking into the water, looking for the schools of salmon. And as the schools of salmon swim into the net, they give this signal for the other people on the boat to pull the net on board. So, all right, here comes my light, a little bit more illumination. This is one from probably the 1930s. And this is what they look like today. 2 stationary platforms. They are run entirely off of solar power. They do not move. It's very communal fishing. It doesn't use any fossil fuels. It's very sustainable because when the fish are pulled up on the boat, they are undamaged. They are healthy. They are alive. They go into a live well. And if you happen to have any bycatch, that is salmon or other fish you didn't mean to catch, you scoop them out of the live well, you put them back in the ocean. Here's a couple of videos to give you a sense of what this looks like. The spotters now are at the front by the crow's nest. The nets are pulled out first through lynches, but then in kind of the final movement, it is just the strength of the people on board. And I actually volunteered on two of these vessels over the course of the day. You can see the salmon coming up to the surface now, being pulled up in the net. The spotters and the crow's nets are still just looking down into the glassy clear water for the fish, just like their ancestors. But also it's supported by a few underwater cameras as well. And I'll give you a closer look at this too. Whoop. That's my friend Riley up in the crow's nest. That's me looking down into the live well where the fish are hand caught and bled and then put to bleed out in a couple other wells as well before they're, as well as other fishing methods would let them suffocate on deck or put them directly on ice. So it creates a really high quality fish as well because the fish are allowed to relax and feel safe. They don't have all these stress chemicals being released in their meat. And again, there's a gentle handling process throughout the whole thing. So it also delivers a fish with all of its scales, a very healthy fish. Underwater cameras, that's what they look like. There's usually someone sitting under the crow's nest looking at them. And here's what it's like from deck when you pull them on.
Bringing it up. You've got a good dive now. And get behind it. Get behind the bag. Behind the bag. There you go. 2 people behind.
You can hear the captain yelling at us on how to do it. There were 2 new fishers on board and me. And so when it gets really riled up, he comes halfway down the ladder and yell at us by name to make sure we're doing it right. There is no other fishing like this in the world. It is unique to the Pacific Northwest. As I mentioned, it was invented there in the neighborhood of about 10,000 years ago by the Salish people. It's totally ingenious. Let's see, that's more in there. They're hand bled by you have to catch them with your hand and then pop out one of their gills, which allows them to sort of bleed out peacefully. And yeah, here is me learning how to catch a live salmon with my bare hands.
It's like, don't touch me.
Yeah! All right. Sorry,
I got it.
What now? So I didn't just like stand idly by, you know, like I immersed myself in each of these things too to be able to tell the story. And I worked for 8 hours that day and my muscles were swollen and like my pinching hands from doing that again and again. I was all scratched up from their bony gills. I think I have a picture. Yeah, absolutely covered in fish gore. And I had to fly to New York this night. The fishing season got pushed back and back and back because there had been a landslide. So basically, this is me going to shore. I took my wet clothes and those sneakers off and put them in a plastic bag. The sneakers were never the same. I had to throw them out. I sort of like gave myself a bath with wet wipes and got in a car and drove 2.5 hours south to the SeaTac airport and then sat next to somebody on an overnight flight on a red eye. So I am sorry to whoever I was sitting next to. I definitely smelled like fish, but what an experience. It was truly incredible. Oh, there's one video I wish I included, but I didn't. All right, I'll just have to tell it to you. One of the most amazing things that happened at the end of this day was as I was helping out the first Indigenous fishing team to have a reef net gear in almost 80 years, 2 seals came by and they were splashing around and they were playing with the ropes of the nets and swimming in and out and then just sort of swam on their way. And it just seemed to me this amazing symbol of how non-invasive, non-intrusive this fishing method is to the natural environment, that these 2 seals can just be having a good time and seeing what we're up to. In this time when salmon are deeply endangered, we need to be thinking more about successful wild harvesting methods like this one to make sure that protected salmon are protected by the fact that you can just put them back in the water. So I figure I'll stop there, Peter, and we could take some questions.
That was wonderful, Sarah. Thank you so much. And they
Little
are
taste
great
behind the
videos.
scenes, but of course there's so many more stories in the book too. Oh, thank you, Cynthia. She says cool videos. I come from an art school background, so I always want to document, but having those photos and those videos help me to be able to write about it again, sometimes a year or more later, right? So I need
Mhm.
to be able to take myself back into that moment. And I have to say, one of the most amazing tools that I hadn't anticipated was Instagram stories. I was doing a lot of Instagram stories while I was there, and those were moments that weren't necessarily like big moments that I wanted to make the biggest, most beautiful photos. It's just like little things that caught my attention. But then going back and these were things I'd forgotten, small details that really struck me in the moment, or even thoughts that I had while I was in the middle of it that I'd completely forgotten about. So starting a new chapter and just going back and watching my Instagram from that time ended up being such an incredible tool to help me remember what it felt like to be in these spaces.
Nice. Well, I'm going to take MC's privilege, and I'm going to ask you the first couple of questions.
Okay, fair.
And I know there are over 6,000 things on the Ark, and you can't have 6,000 chapters in a book. You had to make some choices.
Nobody will read it.
But we're in Gilroy. Why not garlic?
Well, there is no endangered garlic in Gilroy. Now, there is garlic on the Ark of Taste. And actually, I just came across it recently because I did a podcast out of Portland. And so I looked up Portland and I looked up Oregon to see what was on the Ark and interesting. And one of my favorite garlics, which is the Spanish Roja garlic, which is not Spanish at all. I think someone just gave it a jazzy name. Really came into its own in the Portland area. It's a wonderfully spicy garlic that also has a lot of sugar that caramelizes beautifully when you roast it. It's a hardneck garlic, which does not very well in Gilroy at all. I think it's originally from Vermont. And like I said, it grows a lot up in Portland. Hardneck garlics want cooler temperatures. And then what we get out of Gilroy and find in our grocery stores tends to be those soft neck garlics, which are not in trouble at all. So I did, though, Peter, write about Gilroy extensively in my first book, 8 Flavors, in which I devote an entire chapter to garlic. So if you're itching for some hometown pride, please pick up a copy of my first book, 8 Flavors, which maybe is also in the library, I hope, and you'll get all of the garlic knowledge that you're craving.
Well, I have to admit I didn't read your first book, but now I have incentive to do so. I'm no longer in Gilroy. I moved a little bit east, but there's quite possible there was heirloom garlic grown in Gilroy in my garden, and I brought it with me. I'm actually growing 2 kinds of garlic. Inchelium is on the Ark, and Siberian Red, which isn't, but it's my favorite. It is a hardneck garlic that I got in Santa Fe, brought home, and thought the elevation, it won't grow, and it thrives.
Oh, that's so great. I mean, that's one of the things I love about the Ark. It just gives you permission to have some fun experiments. They do a seed kit every year, as you know. And so I ordered this year's seed kit because it contained 4 different grains. And just the thought of growing grains on a garden level, I can't wait to try it. At the moment, I have Cox Prolific corn in the ground, which is an heirloom Ark of Taste corn varietal. The other 3 I had to wait on because I was already out of space. It's my first year gardening, and it was sort of late in the season to get things in the ground. We're getting into the era, once we hit 115 degrees, as we were talking about, a lot of things get scorched. So there's sort of 3 growing seasons in the spring, fall, and winter. So I anticipate putting them in the ground, but I'm also going to put in some Long Island cheese pumpkins. I've got 2 types of Ark of Taste tomatoes out there, including Radiator Charlie's mortgage lifting tomatoes, which absolutely have the best name possible. So it's you can do this on a very small level, which I think is so fun.
It is. Well, I'm going to talk about another Santa Clara County crop, or within a theme of a group of crops, because you and I have been emailing back and forth about heirloom stone fruits.
Yes, the Alberta peach. That's going to be a future, we're calling it Endangered Eats, the column that I'm writing for Gastro Obscura. I hope, as long as the Masamuto family lets me come out. But I mean, you go ahead. You tell me the story, because it was your phrasing that made me want to write about it.
Well, okay, I'll tell you that story, but we have celebrated, and this was even before I was in Slow Food. It was an early board under the Ark of Taste, the Blenheim, or Blenheim as some people say, apricot. the center of cultivation is Santa Clara County. And we've done the things around it all year. So if you're in Gilroy, San Jose area, especially in June, you want to look for those apricots.
You can get them dried from Heritage Foods too. That's how I got to try some.
They're okay dried.
Yeah.
Sorry. Picking them fresh, and which is the same with the Alberta peach, as you said in a recent email, or you were quoting me, that they're so juicy that you have to eat them over the sink. And at least somebody on this call, one of the people, Mary, who just asked the question, was on the peach picking. I believe Mary was on our peach picking team one time, that we would adopt a tree, team of 12, and we go out. I no longer have a tree, but we go out to the Fresno area, to Delray, to Masumoto Family Farm, when they tell us the peaches are ready to pick. And we get whatever the season permits. So one year, 12 of us took home 50 pounds apiece. Other years weren't quite so good. That was a banner year. But we spend the morning on the farm. They feed us breakfast. We pick peaches. They are the absolute nicest family. And I do hope you get out there and join them this year.
Me too. I mean, I think it's such a unique way to save a fruit that isn't necessarily suitable for being in the grocery store. That basically you adopt a tree in advance. And they say have a team because, if there's 12 of you, end up with 50 pounds each. So it's like 600 to 800 pounds over 2 weekends with these trees. And you have this experience. And I remember what you told me, Peter, way back at Slow Foods, was it's a peach so juicy you have to eat it over the kitchen sink. And that's where I was like, I've got to try this peach. And so a lot of times the Arc of Taste really inspires me to travel. I'm excited to drive to Fresno and see what this sort of peach picking celebration is like with this small community.
It's a lot of fun. If she'll come on camera, I'm going to pick on one of the people from Slow Food in here and ask Marie, because she actually boarded the Bodega Red Potato with Slow Food Sonoma County North. Marie, do you mind coming off of off of mute onto mic and telling a couple words about the Bodega Red?
Okay, you got me, Peter. I don't know how to put my picture back on. Okay,
we can hear you.
Well, okay, and I don't know how to put the camera thing back on. But anyway, we are very proud of. Oh, I see here. We're so proud of our Bodega Red Potato. And we have had some problems with it because we've learned a lot. You have to, you have to have a special place to grow the seed. And sometimes there's a crop failure and, and our farmers can't get enough. But anyway, it's been kind of a struggle, but it's been maybe 12 years or so. And it's actually a slow food presidia. Did I say that right? Presidium?
You did.
Presidium. Yeah. Okay. So we're very proud of it. So
and
what
else can potatoes? I'd love to.
I like part of the story that I think you'll like, Sarah. When they first found the potato, and I believe it was only growing on one farm, the seed crop was somewhat diseased. So remind me, do I have the university right? You sent it up to Oregon or Oregon State to have them breed a disease-free cultivar?
Right.
Before you brought it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I was not on the team that did this, so I don't want to take personal credit at all for this. But yes, they sent it to the university, and I don't know, they did some things with radiation and heat. It was all organically sound. But anyway, they had to get all the disease out of it. And that is when we started having the seed potato. And, now we, I wish I had paid more attention to give you some numbers, but we we get thousands of pounds of seed potatoes now for our farmers here, our local farmers markets. And so it's really getting out there. And it was even in a local grocery store called Oliver's. You probably, none of you have heard of that, but in Sonoma County, it's a very popular grocery chain. It's a locally owned grocery chain, and they had the Bodega Reds. So that was really a big thing. We're, just trying to get it back out there. And I didn't realize, to be honest, that I thought potatoes were potatoes, but it's not true. This really is a delicious potato, and different potatoes are different. So anyway, I don't want to take up too much more time, but thanks, Peter.
I'm excited
Well,
to
thank
try
you for
it.
that.
Mary had a question that I'd love to just jump in and answer, and then we could always jump back to.
Yes,
Mary was asking, do you think you might do a book about chefs who do indigenous cooking? I will not, because they are doing their own incredible books that deserve to be supported. So Sean Sherman has his book out. He's a very famous chef who's Lakota, and he also covers a lot of like Ojibwe cooking as well. Of course, I got a blank on all of the names. I'll start putting some in the chat. So Sean Sherman is a chef. He also has an incredible restaurant and store in Minneapolis too. His cookbook is out already. Crystal, thank you. And I'm trying to think of the book. Well, Crystal Wapepa, she is a chef in the Bay Area. She has an incredible restaurant in Oakland. Yes, Wapepa's Kitchen, that if you're out there, oh my gosh, I have to say it's one of the best meals I've had in my life, and is entirely Indigenous owned and staffed. And she has a book coming out. And there's another great book that I just picked up that is, I'm going to put an Amazon link in here. I apologize. I'm sure we can find a better link for it. But it is called, actually, that wasn't very helpful. Hang on. It's called Chiminuam, Native California Foodways for the Contemporary Kitchen. The chef and author as well is such a wonderful person, Sarah Calvosa Olson. The recipes are so cool, and I can't wait to dig into them. So, there are Indigenous people out there who are telling their stories, and we should absolutely be buying these books and learning through food, because what a wonderful way to learn. Is it vegetarian? Probably not in total, but there are definitely vegetarian recipes in there. Reserve your copies to the library.
Sarah, next time you're in the East Bay, in Berkeley, Cafe Ohlone is another place that is doing wonderful
it's on my
food.
to-do list, but at least in the past, their hours have been limited, so I've just never been.
They have been.
Right. I haven't been in the area when it's been open, but I'm thinking after Fresno at end of July, early August, whenever the peaches are ripe, I have to be ready to go. I might then come out to the Bay Area and just take myself on a little working vacation, a little eating vacation.
Eating vacation, yes.
Yeah, for me, it's work, so I just get to deduct it from my taxes.
Well, we only have, Pranav has a question. I'm going to ask anybody else who.
Yes, usually in these Indigenous cookbooks, there are some recipes that are vegetarian and some that are meat, because meat is a traditional foodway here in the Americas, but it's not one that's necessarily available year round. So in the Indigenous cookbooks I work with, there are both recipes, completely vegetarian. Usually if there's an oil used, it's sunflower oil, which is an Indigenous oil rather than fat. So yeah, just take a look. If you get it from the library, you don't have to buy it.
And we do have a hand raised. Katie, do you have a question? Katie on iPhone? Katie, in case there's two Katie? If you're on a phone, you probably need to do *6 to unmute.
There we go. I asked her to unmute and it worked.
So is it working now?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, Katie.
Okay. Hi. So I was wondering, how can I buy or purchase this fish, this unusual fishing that's not common from the Indigenous fishing? If I go to Whole Foods, is that
sometimes okay? So I should mention too that I was really drawn to that one because it was about preserving an action as opposed to a specific food, which I find is really fascinating. So there's a couple ways you can purchase their fish. Lummi Island Wild. I just popped it in the chat. That is their sort of online retail outlet where you can get smoked fish. And it is amazing. They sent some when we had an event in Seattle. It's incredible. Interestingly, they also have a huge contract with Patagonia. So Patagonia sells like prepared foods for camping and hiking, and they have several types of like smoked and seasoned pink salmon, and that is also from reef net fishing. And then there are a lot of restaurants and fish markets in the area that also sell their fish too. So if someone is in the Puget Sound area, there's more ways to access it locally. But those are the two ways that you can order them online. And Lemmy Island Wild will do, they offer frozen, fresh, and smoked fish depending on the season.
I see. And then do you also know, are there any documentaries that are kind of shedding more light on this, like endangered foods, like this whole concept? Like,
Peter, do you?
because I think
I'm not. Go ahead.
No, I'm thinking like, I mean, I don't mind showing my video. I'm not able to show, it says that my video has been disabled
Okay.
by the host. So I tried to show my video, but I think it says I can start it now. Okay.
Hi.
So,
There you go.
hi. So, yeah, so I'm just thinking to shed more light on this, maybe like a documentary on this would be excellent. Like I would be very intrigued. I think more people would be more, I don't know, maybe more information about this would to more people, just getting it to a higher level of people so they can make it like, wow, this is becoming an issue.
I would love that. I do not have the resources to do it. I will tell you firsthand that it is strangely very, very difficult to get food programming produced right now. It has been for several years. Every once in a while, a few really excellent programs slip through, like High on the Hog, which is a great documentary food series about Black American foodways. But it is impossible. It's next to impossible to get anything produced that is not a competition show. And that's how it's been for 5 or 6 years, I would say. Salt, fat, acid, heat is a notable exception. Ugly Delicious is another one, but other things like Stanley Tucci's one there or Padma Lakshi's series, they have to be headed by a major celebrity, and that's the only way that they're getting through. So that's like 5 shows I've mentioned in the past 5 years. So unfortunately, although, you know, I've worked with producers and people are aware of my idea, my first book got shopped around extensively. Nobody picked it up. Right now I am being shopped around for maybe a podcast based on this book that I would help produce too, but you know, never say never. High on the Hog, which is an incredible book, came out about 20 years ago, and the documentary debuted about 2 years ago and suddenly launched that book to #1 in the New York Times bestseller list. So things do come back around. You're right. I'm totally a visual person. You know, I picked things that I think are very like visually indulgent. So if you know anybody with money, Katie,
Okay,
send them a copy of my book, please.
I will.
There are some shorts around, sometimes about a single food. I don't have any titles to give you. I will say that probably the vast majority of the 6,000 foods on the Ark of Taste cannot be bought in a grocery store. Grocery stores don't want them. A grocery store will not touch an Alberta peach, because as soon as you touch it on the counter, it'll fall apart. They're so fragile.
Sometimes they're hyper-local, sometimes they're so fragile, sometimes it's just so many different reasons. And actually each chapter sort of panned out to be a slightly different reason why this food was endangered or on the brink of extinction, which was, I didn't anticipate and was really fascinating.
Like, what
I
about
see
all
where
the...
it's...
Oh,
Go ahead, and then we're going to wrap up.
All the orchards. Like I grew up in Cupertino area in the Bay Area, and I grew up like walking home from school, like going across the orchard valley. So it's just, I don't know what happened to like all these beautiful orchards. They're gone. I think there might be one in Sunnyvale.
I mean,
there are about a dozen left.
Yeah,
but most of them became houses.
Like 90% of its farmland to housing. I mean, what the bigger things that need to happen when we're talking about crops, we're talking about orchards and farms, is for a farmer or an orchardist to put something in the ground, it has to be profitable. So the easiest way to preserve these foods is to buy them, is to, you know, buy local unusual apples, is to adopt an Alberta peach tree with 7 of your closest friends and go get a couple 100 pounds of peaches, you know, shop at these places that produce these really rare foods in your communities, or order them online too. But we also need sort of broader legislature to help protect small farms that are going to grow these non-monocropped, unusual, traditional, heirloom, local foods. It is, there's just so much risk in being a farmer today. And if you can sell your family farm that's been around for 150 years for millions, if not billions of dollars in Central California, you're probably going to do it. It takes a real special type of person to want to start a farm in the first place. And although we pride ourselves as a nation of bootstrappers and small business people and farmers, we actually offer very little support because that would be handouts. That's the opposing cultural attitude. So you're supposed to lift yourself up, but we don't offer any sort of like support network or grid or infrastructure or just money for people that want to be doing something good for the environment in their community. So we really need to think about farm legislature to support a diversification of crops, but we can each start locally by just supporting small farms and eating delicious food. It's the best type of activism because you get a really nice snack out of it too. Money, you know, it does a lot of work. So making the effort to buy fish from Lemay Island wild, or making the effort to buy those local peaches or to buy from the orchards that are left, you are supporting something really important, something traditional and historic, and you have a yummy snack. It's the best.
Sarah,
Thank
okay,
you.
that is a great note to start wrapping up. Thank you for that, Sarah. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a fun hour.
My pleasure.
I'm going to give one tip. I'm going to give one tip to folks. Blenheim apricot season is late June. They're coming. You go look at the trees, you get little green fruits, and they'll be yellow with green shoulders in just over a month. There are 3 heritage groves owned by the cities of Los Altos, Sunnyvale, and Saratoga, and they all do something around them. But if you go to the Sunnyvale Community Center, I think weekends, maybe also some weekdays toward the end of June, you can buy them from the city. They set up their own farm stand.
Cool.
And you can get them from commercial orchards, and you can get them dried, but supporting from the cities is a really great way to go. So with that tip for our local folks.
You're all now going to engage like in your locale in a different way. You've now been tuned into something that some of you might have been aware of, but not all of you were. This particular delicious apricot that grows where you are, and now you're going to be on the lookout for them, and now you're going to taste them for the first time and just like live where you live in a new way. I think that's so awesome.
Well, and you can't necessarily buy them everywhere, so you eat what's special in your area, and that's one of the special things. So, well, as a slow food chapter leader, I've been about that for a long time.
Slow food regional manager. Just kidding.
Yes. Got to get my title, my former title right. With that, since we're 2 after 8 and we wanted to honor the time, I'm going to pass it back to Jenna to wrap us up.
Jenna, we can't hear you for some reason. You're not muted, but you're not coming through.
We're going to figure out how to post to Zoom, and I'll work with Jenna to see if we can post some of the chat and questions and links as well somewhere. She can capture them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we'll figure out where to post them. But
yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now we can.
Wonderful.
There you are.
I had to switch my microphone. Okay. So yes, this meeting has been recorded. We are going to try to post it onto the library's YouTube channel, but if for whatever reason we are not able to do that, we will still be able to send the link to all of the participants who came this evening, so that you guys can watch it. And also if anyone had to miss out for whatever reason, then they'll be able to watch it as well. I don't think that the chat gets saved, but it might. If for whatever reason it does not save the chat, then I will make sure to include all of the links that were shared this evening in the email that we send you with the access to the recording. So I am going to put Sarah's book in the chat one more time if anyone wanted to click on that to place a request and get a chance to read it if you have not yet done so. Again, one more time, thank you so much to Sarah and also to Peter for this wonderful discussion that we had tonight. I hope everyone had a great time. And with that, have a wonderful evening, everybody, and keep an eye on your email for the link to the recording.